We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men evolved differently, that they are born with certain mutable characteristics, and that among these are life and the pursuit of pleasure. Sound good? Is that a country you want to live in? The only characteristics you get are life and the pursuit of pleasure, and that everybody in reality is different? Well, that's true. But what happened to rights? What happened to inalienable rights? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What happened to being equal? This line comes from Yuval Noah Harari, a historian and a journalist who has perhaps done better than anybody else to write in common everyday way what it would be like if we lived in a world that was truly driven by biology. More particularly, that was shaped by evolutionary theory. He points out right away in his writing that pretty much everything that you and I think has come from not our own what? Not our own life, our own experience, but really according to Christian thought. He says this is a longer quote, but I'm going to run through this because it's so insightful. Give me just a minute here to be with you. He says, according to the science of biology, people were not created. They have evolved. And they certainly did not evolve to be equal. The idea of equality is inextricably intertwined with the idea of creation. The Americans got the idea of equality from Christianity, which argues that every person has a divinely created soul and that all souls are equal before God. He actually does a decent job of representing Christianity there, doesn't he? He says, however, if we do not believe in the Christian myths about God and creation and souls, what does it mean that all people are equal? Evolution is based on difference, not equality. Every person carries a somewhat different genetic code and is exposed from birth to different environmental influences. This leads to the development of different qualities that carry with them different chances of survival. Equally, there are no such things as rights in biology. There are only organs, abilities, and characteristics. Birds fly not because they have a right to fly, but because they have wings. And it's not true that these organs and abilities and characteristics are unalienable. And what are the characteristics that evolved in humans? Life? Well, certainly. But liberty? There is no such thing in biology. Just like equality, rights, and limited liabilities companies, liberty is something that people invented and that exists only in their imagination. From a biological viewpoint, it is meaningless to say that humans in democratic societies are free, whereas humans in dictatorships are unfree. Realize what he says? Every belief that you hold dear, at least I would assume that most of you hold dear, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the equality that you have with everybody else, and the equality before the law, he says it is all a myth if science is the foundation of reality. Here's another example. He says, in truth, our concepts of things that are natural or unnatural are not taken from biology, but from Christian theology. The theological meaning of natural is in accordance with the intentions of the God who created nature. Christian theologians argued that God created the human body, intending each limb and organ to serve a particular purpose. If we use our limbs and organs for the purpose envisioned by God, then it is a natural activity. To use them differently than God intends is unnatural. But evolution has no purpose. Organs have not evolved with a purpose. And the way they are used is in constant flux. There is not a single organ in the human body that only does the job its prototype did when it was first appeared hundreds of millions of years ago. Everything about you is changeable, malleable, and you have no purpose in life. That's what he just said. There's nothing natural to you. I appreciate what he writes as a fairly blunt or direct author because he does make the ramifications of the discussion of our origins very plain. He points out that a lot of people would like to beat around the bush and keep all of the good Christian values that we have in life, but get rid of the Christian position behind them. And it is my contention, it's my intention, that as you and I would study through Genesis together, that we would have the opportunity to assess our convictions, our ideas that found all of our reality. I certainly want you to know the Christian story of the origins of the world. Some of you probably don't know it terribly well, and so I hope that this is a chance for you to know the story of the origins of the universe from the Christian perspective. Secondly, then, I hope on top of that you have a chance to see the value of that Christian story. I want you to look at words like what Harari has written here, and then look at the life that you lead and say, would I like to live in his world, or do I want my world? And am I picking and choosing my own reality, or have I accepted what has to be? But then third, most importantly, it would be my hope that you would believe the Christian story. That's what I would like for you most of all. So let's begin together taking a look at this story, the Christian story of the origins of the world and how it has all come to be, by beginning with the first verse of Genesis. Read it with me if you would, please. It's very easy. I think most of us might have heard it before. It begins like this. Read it with me. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Every good story has to start in the beginning, right? So even if you've never read it before, I'm sure you're not surprised at all to read the line, in the beginning. Every good story has to start at the beginning. This is the beginning of the first book, it's called, that you can find in the book of what's called the Bible. The Bible is actually a compilation. It's a collection of 66 books in the Protestant tradition. And the first book that is in that Bible is called, in English, Genesis. Genesis. And does anybody know what the word Genesis means? I'm sure you can guess it because you've already heard it so often in English used this way. Genesis, of course, means beginning or origins. But that Greek name for the book, Genesis, comes actually from the Greek text of this book. It was originally written in Hebrew, and it had just the general title of the law, HaTorah. It was one of the first 5 books that was assembled together at the beginning of this book that we now know as the Bible. It would have been called the Hebrew Scriptures originally. Now we have to cover a couple of quick technical details before we read more of that first verse or review it again. First of all, the first verse, the author, nobody claims this book. Now, Christians have long said that Moses wrote the book, in part because the Jews said Moses wrote the book. We don't have an authorship claim for this book. Like a lot of ancient texts, nobody says, yeah, it was mine, I did it. And there's lots of reasons for that. You can look it up, but there's lots of good reasons to say that Moses wrote it as well. In terms of also the date of the book, when was this text that we know as Genesis written? Again, none is given. As far as you know, it could have been written yesterday. Obviously, that's not true because your grandparents know it, but no name is given for it. Or, excuse me, no name, no date. No date is given for it. If you read the entire thing, you're not going to find a date for it. So this gets into many of the early questions that have to get answered about the text. If you prefer to see the world as a younger thing, or as a younger development, then most people would say it was written perhaps about 1,500 years ago, or at least compiled 1,500 years BC, plus then a little bit before that. And a little bit in this case might be a couple thousand years, and not a couple 100,000 years. But yes, because if you prefer to see the world as much older, then normally the book gets dated to 1,500 years plus a lot of years, like 100,000 years before that. And if your view is more of an evolutionary view for the origins of the universe, then you've got a massive time span that you put on this book, covering something like 100,000 years, but you have to go quite a ways back. So there's quite a bit of variety in terms of dating the book because no date for the book is given. That's the technical background for the book of Genesis. And it starts then, as we said, with this small phrase, in the beginning. Every astute reader reads that line and they ask themselves, well, the beginning of what? Is this the beginning of the story, or is this the beginning of everything? How have you answered that question? This is the beginning of the story, no doubt, right? But most of us also would suggest that this is also intended to tell us the beginning of everything. It's actually a difficult phrase to read. It's not terribly hard to read in the beginning, but it's very confusing for us because in Hebrew, the language that this was originally written in, you didn't start phrases with, and they're called adverbs. We translate it into a preposition in English. But it was verboten. It was bad grammar and syntax to start a sentence this way. Because of that, many people have wondered what this sentence is kind of trying to say. It's awkward. Just like if your grandma used to yell at you about having hanging prepositions. Your grandma ever used to yell at you about having hanging prepositions? Anybody even know what a hanging preposition is? How many of you know what a hanging preposition is? There's like 5 of you. If you end your sentence with, right? Bobby and I went with. With whom? With what? Right? With is a preposition. It's supposed to have words that follow after it. It is left hanging, and you say, huh? I don't know what that means. In the same way, in Hebrew, having the phrase in the beginning is awkward. It's bad grammar. Proper Hebrew syntax would have never done it. And it has confused us for many years then. Is this the beginning of the story? Is this the beginning of all things? You have to sort through that. And then it says, God created. God created. This word for God is not a special word. This is a generic word for God. If you read through lots of ancient literature, some of you might like to read through old stories, you'll come across this same word for God in other places. The Canaanites used this word for God. There's nothing special here about the God of the Bible, the Hebrew God, at least not until you read on. There is something special about the word created. This is a word that gets used often to make something out of nothing. It means to make something special if you don't have anything else there. And that's how the story starts. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's what I want to draw your attention to today and let you consider. You ever thought about why the story starts that way? Let me give you a little illustration that I heard recently that helped me think about what this line points out for us. The big movie of my younger years was Jurassic Park. I don't know how many of you have seen Jurassic Park. I would assume by now most of you have seen Jurassic Park. It was groundbreaking for its era. It was the highest grossing film between 1993 and 1998, and so it stands in the likes of films like Gone with the Wind and Titanic, and then the Avengers, which one was it? The one, Endgame, I think, that has made the most money of all time. It was the blockbuster summer hit that everybody talked about still for years. And since then, the movie has gone on because of its cinematic effects and because of its great practices. It has been selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. That film, of course, has spawned multiple franchises and theme parks and video games and all kinds of things. Now, what is the movie? Sorry, kids, I know you haven't seen this. I mean, my kids, right? You haven't seen Jurassic Park, but what's the movie Jurassic Park about? I wouldn't be surprised. I bet all of you would say it's about something like a science experiment that goes wrong, a dinosaur park that turns into a catastrophe, and then a man who gets eaten by a dinosaur while going to the bathroom. That's probably what the movie's about, right? That's probably what you remember. Would it surprise you if I told you that that's not what the movie's about? Right? If you've watched the movie, you know what the movie is actually about because the movie Jurassic Park opens with one scene. If you watch the beginning of the movie, there's the two doctors, Dr. Grant and a person named Ellie, have just discovered dinosaur bones. That's how the movie opens. And they are cleaning off these bones. They're archaeologists, right? They talk about this velociraptor that they just found. And as they walk away from this dinosaur that they just found, Dr. Grant says, "Kids." And Ellie, the leading female actress, says back to him, "Well, what's so wrong with kids? What's so bad about kids?" And Dr. Grant says, "Look, they're noisy, and they're messy, and they're expensive, and they smell." And she says back to him basically, "Well, maybe you should think about that." And then the whole story goes, and what do you see? Dinosaurs that are noisy and expensive and incredibly destructive, and they smell worse than everything. The movie ends, of course, then with a little bit of romance of them changing their mind. That's what the whole story is about. It's about Dr. Grant's realization that although dinosaurs might be kind of cool, maybe kids are a lot better for us and for humanity. What's Genesis about? You and I often, understandably, look at Genesis as some kind of science textbook. We look at it as a history book that's going to tell us the questions for difficult for the answers for difficult questions. We might feel like it's a biology text or it's some other kind of philosophy text. What Genesis is really, and the reason it starts with this line, is to say this is the story of the loving God who wanted to have some people that he could know. And he wanted the people to know him more than anything. That's the whole point of Genesis. And that's the point of this line, that in the beginning, God wanted to have a place for people to call home, and he wanted to have some people that he could call his very own. This is what the book of Genesis is all about, that there is one God who made everything so that he could have a forever family, so that he could have the people of God. Many scholars will point out that the beginning of Genesis is simply an introduction to the stories of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob that are going to fill up the rest of the book of Genesis because God wants to tell about the relationship, the loving relationship, the saving relationship that he has with his people. It goes on, for example, here's John Jeske, one of our people. He writes, "The important book of beginnings is not intended to be a general history of the ancient world. The specific purpose of Genesis is to trace God's saving activity." Genesis is the first chapter in the history of God's magnificent rescue operation, which we call his plan of salvation. As you read Genesis, what does God want from you? He wants you to know him. He wants you to know him as the God who wanted more than anything for you to have a place to live and for you to be the people that he knows. That's the whole point of the story. And as you read through, and I hope you have been reading through some of Genesis over the last few days, and as you go forward now and you read through Genesis more, if you're smart, if you're paying attention, you're going to have lots of questions about Genesis. Genesis is some kind of, we could call it a biography, or maybe it's a historiography, because it is supposed to be telling the story of God's saving work in his people's lives, in your lives. So what are you going to do with a story of God's saving work in your life? One of the best examples I've seen to help us think a little bit about this, I have the manual for my car here. I just got a new car, new to me, from my sister, a raging 2007 Dodge Grand Caravan. It's amazing. It's the worst car I've ever driven. She gave me the manual for the car because, of course, even though I know cars, I don't know that car. I don't know how that car runs. I don't know how that car works. I don't know how that car is supposed to function. I don't understand these things that are crank windows that they don't work right. I don't know. I push the button and nothing happens. Yes, it legitimately has crank windows. Did you know that they still made cars with crank windows? I need the manual to understand not only that car, right, but how I'm supposed to relate to that car. God's purpose in giving you the Bible is not to tell you a book of rules that you are supposed to obey, or to even give you a list of ways to be a nice person. God's purpose in giving you the Bible is to explain the creation that he made for you and the way that he wants to relate to you. The Bible is a manual for you to understand the God who gave you this great world. And that's an opportunity for you and for me. Right? Some of us, we don't care about the Bible nearly enough. We can go weeks and months without cracking it open. Right? I mean, you show up for church, you read it off the screen, you listen and you say, "Oh, I got the Bible now." When's the last time you actually looked at the text? Some of us haven't memorized a verse in that Bible in decades, perhaps ever. And if you can't memorize, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, I'm not sure, I can't ask, that's not too much to ask, is it? You have so many chances. And so as we work together this fall, let me ask you and encourage you and say, hey, learn the manual. Study the manual. I would bet that there are people amongst you here who know the specs and the details of your car, not only down to the tenth of a liter on the engine size and how many cubic inches it is and all your foot-pounds of torque and all of that thing, right? But you know all of the details of your car. You can certainly handle learning the details of the God who created this world for you. And you will find, as you get to know him, that it's not a book, but it's a person. Because as we heard from John, in the beginning was the Word. God is a word for you to know. That's why he's cased himself in a manual that you can get to know.